3 weeks before my sister's wedding, my mother called to smooth things over about my daughter's role in it, and somewhere in the middle of an otherwise vague, apologetic call, she said one sentence she clearly never meant to say out loud. "It's $10,000, Marisol." I couldn't exactly say no. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. My 7-year-old practicing her flower girl walked down our hallway in the next room, completely unaware that her role in that wedding had already been sold. I remember the exact texture of that moment, standing at my kitchen counter with a dish towel still in my hand, the late afternoon light slanting through the window the way it does every day around that time. My mother's voice had that specific bright, rehearsed quality she gets when she's building up to something she doesn't want to say directly. Small talk about the caterer, a question about my work schedule, before the actual point of the call finally surfaced. "There's just been a small change to the wedding party," she said. "Nothing major. I wanted you to hear it from me first." I asked her what kind of change, and that's when the number slipped out, clumsy and unguarded, the way true things sometimes escape people who've spent too long rehearsing a lie. Welcome to Sweet Payback Stories. Tonight's story begins with a number my mother never meant to say out loud, and ends with a family finally reckoning with exactly what got quietly traded away to make one wedding day look a certain way. My name is Marisol Betancourt. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a wedding photographer, which meant that months before this all happened, I'd already signed a full contract to shoot my own sister's wedding, deposit paid, package finalized, a professional obligation that turned out to matter enormously once everything else started unraveling. I want you to hold on to that detail, because being both a family member and a paid vendor at the same event put me in a strange, useful position, close enough to see everything, obligated enough that I couldn't simply walk away in protest. I built my business from nothing over 8 years, starting with a second-hand camera and a handful of friends' weddings shot for free just to build a portfolio, and by the time Colette got engaged, I had a genuine, thriving practice, a full calendar most seasons, a reputation good enough that couples booked me a year in advance. Colette had asked me to shoot her wedding the same week she got engaged, both of us crying a little in her kitchen over the idea of it, me photographing my own little sister's wedding day, something I'd genuinely looked forward to more than almost any job I'd ever booked. I signed the contract myself, the same standard agreement I use for every client, deposit non-refundable, full balance due 30 days before the event, terms I'd written myself years earlier and had never once imagined applying to my own family. My daughter Ren is 7, and she'd spent 2 full months practicing for that flower girl role, twirling every evening in a lavender dress in our hallway, counting her steps out loud, the specific focused joy only a 7-year-old can bring to something as small as scattering petals down an aisle. She'd assigned herself a whole routine, 3 twirls at the start, a pause at the halfway mark to wave at an imaginary crowd, a final scatter of pretend petals she practiced with actual dried lavender. I'd bought her from the craft store specifically for this purpose. I have a dozen videos of those hallway rehearsals on my phone, her small, serious face utterly focused on getting it exactly right for her Aunt Colette's big day. My mother's call that afternoon started with a vague, apologetic tone, something about changes to the wedding party, before the $10,000 number slipped out mid-sentence, clearly not meant for me to hear. I asked her, carefully, to explain exactly what she meant. She backpedaled immediately, her voice climbing half an octave, the way it always does when she's caught off guard, saying it wasn't what it sounded like, that Ren had simply gotten shy, and asked to step back from the role herself. I let that lie sit in the air for a moment before telling her, gently, that Ren had practiced every single night for 2 months, and had said nothing to me about wanting to stop, that I had 12 videos on my phone proving exactly the opposite. My mother went quiet on the other end of the line, the specific quiet of someone realizing they've said more than they intended to. I called my sister Colette directly after that, watching Ren twirl one more time through the kitchen doorway, needing to understand how much of this she'd actually known. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful, mid-conversation about seating charts with someone in the background before she registered the tone in my voice and asked what was wrong. I told her what our mother had let slip. Colette's shock felt genuine, immediate, her voice rising with something between confusion and alarm. She told me Wren asked to step back, Colette said, her voice tight. That's what she told me too. She said Wren mentioned being nervous about it, that she seemed relieved to step back actually. That's the whole reason I didn't push it further. We sat with that discrepancy together for a moment, both of us realizing our mother had told two different versions of the same lie to two different daughters, each version crafted specifically to be the one that particular daughter would accept, without asking too many follow-up questions. I need to see whatever you find, Colette said finally, her voice steadier now, something harder settling into it. All of it. I don't care how bad it is. I told her I would, and I meant it, though neither of us yet understood exactly how bad it was actually going to get. Included on the wedding's shared vendor coordination thread as the contracted photographer, I went back through old messages that same evening, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open long after Wren had gone to sleep. Scrolling through weeks of logistics chatter about timelines and floral deliveries, and found a line from the wedding planner sent nearly a month earlier, referencing the flower girl swap, already handled, phrased with a casualness that told me this hadn't been a last-minute family decision at all. I read that message 4 times, the specific phrase already handled sitting heavier each time I reread it, a full month before my mother's call. A full month of Wren practicing every single night without anyone in that thread thinking to mention it to me. I texted the planner directly the next morning, a woman named Odessa, who I'd worked alongside professionally on 2 other weddings before this one, framing it as a simple scheduling question about who I'd be photographing in that role so I could plan my shot list accordingly. Her reply came with a me-hour, casual, entirely unaware of the weight behind my question, confirming what I'd started to suspect. The swap had come from the groom's side, specifically from Vivienne, the groom's mother, who'd wanted her own niece walking that aisle instead. I figured you already knew, since you're family. Odessa wrote, a sentence that landed with its own quiet sting. Colette and I found the proof neither of us wanted to find scrolling through an old family group chat later that week, at her own insistence, digging back through months of wedding planning messages. Buried in there was a text from our mother, sent to Colette weeks earlier, describing the swap as already sorted. Don't mention the money. Colette hadn't been lied to about the swap happening. She'd only been lied to about why, told a version that let her believe it was Wren's own choice, rather than a transaction she'd apparently agreed to, without fully understanding what she was agreeing to. I decided, sitting with Colette in her kitchen that evening, not to withdraw from the photography contract in protest. I decided instead to keep shooting the wedding fully, professionally, while quietly gathering every piece of correspondence related to the swap, treating the whole situation the way I'd treat any client dispute in my business, carefully, on paper, without letting emotion get ahead of documentation. Wren found out by accident 3 days later, overhearing part of a phone call she wasn't meant to hear while I was in the next room, and asked me that night, with a simplicity that still catches in my throat remembering it, whether she'd done something wrong. She was already in her pajamas, sitting on the edge of her bed, her lavender dress hanging on the back of her closet door, where she'd insisted on keeping it visible. "Did I mess up my practicing?" she asked. "Is that why Aunt Colette doesn't want me anymore?" I held her for a long time before I answered, telling her, as honestly as I could manage for a 7-year-old, that none of this was about her at all, that grown-ups had made some complicated decisions that had nothing to do with anything she'd said or done, that her practicing had been perfect every single time. She nodded slowly, not fully convinced, and asked if she could still wear the lavender dress even if she wasn't the flower girl anymore. I told her absolutely, whenever she wanted, and she wore it to breakfast the next morning, which felt in its own small way like exactly the right response. A cousin on the groom's side, a woman named Priscilla, who'd clearly grown uneasy about the whole arrangement herself, pulled me aside at a pre-wedding gathering, drink in hand, glancing over her shoulder before she spoke. "I probably shouldn't say anything," she started, which is usually exactly the sentence that precedes someone saying quite a lot. She told me quietly why Vivienne had actually wanted the swap. Vivienne's family ran a regionally known catering and events company, image-conscious in a specific, practiced way, their name attached to enough weddings and galas around the region that they treated their own family events like extensions of their brand. Vivian's been weird about the wedding photos going out on their company accounts for months, Priscilla said, lowering her voice further. She said something once about wanting the wedding party to photograph clean, whatever that means. I didn't think much of it until I heard about the flower girl thing. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was a specific, ugly kind of image management. My daughter reduced to a liability in someone else's brand strategy. A calculation made about a 7-year-old's face in photographs, rather than anything resembling an actual human concern. Reviewing the wedding's shared vendor budget as part of my own contract reconciliation the following week. Sitting at my desk late one evening with a spreadsheet open, and my third cup of tea gone cold beside me, I found the real financial shape of what had happened. That $10,000 had never actually been added to the wedding's real costs at all. It had been funneled through a vague coordination fee line item on the planner's invoice, a category so generic it could have meant almost anything, meaning the money never touched a single actual expense for the event itself. No flowers, no additional catering, nothing that would have shown up in any version of the budget Colette had actually seen and approved. Cross-referencing with bank transfer confirmations the planner reluctantly shared once I pressed her directly about the discrepancy, calling her office twice before she finally agreed to send the documentation, I found something that reframed my mother's role in all of this entirely. 2 separate transfers, not one. The larger portion had gone to the planner's own operating account, presumably her cut for facilitating the arrangement. A second, smaller transfer, $1,800, had gone directly to an account I recognized immediately as my mother's. She'd kept a portion of those $10,000 for herself, quietly, framing it privately, according to the planner, as compensation for handling everyone's feelings through the transition. My mother hadn't simply been pressured into an uncomfortable arrangement, she'd profited from it. I confronted her directly the following weekend, meeting at her house rather than over the phone this time, laying out everything I'd found calmly, without raising my voice: the invoice, the transfer records, the 2 different lies told to 2 different daughters, printed pages, spread across her own dining table. She sat very still while I talked, her hands folded in her lap. "You kept part of the money," I said, sliding the transfer confirmation toward her. She looked at it for a long moment before answering. "It wasn't like that, Marisol." I asked her what it was like then, if not that. She was quiet, turning the page slightly with one finger, not quite meeting my eyes. "Weddings are exhausting to plan, managing everyone's feelings, keeping the peace, that's work too, even if nobody calls it that." I told her that keeping the peace at my daughter's expense wasn't work I'd ever asked her to do, and certainly not work I'd have agreed to pay for if she'd simply asked me directly. She didn't fully deny any of it. Instead, she said, almost pleadingly, that the money had helped everyone in the end, a rationalization that told me more about her actual priorities than any apology could have. Colette faced a genuinely difficult decision once she had the full picture, days before her own wedding. Confront her future mother-in-law directly and risk real tension entering her marriage, or let the arrangement quietly stand and carry the guilt of it herself. I watched my sister wrestle with that choice for 2 full days, calling me late at night, unsure which version of starting a marriage felt more survivable. "If I say something, Marisol, it's not just awkward for one dinner," she told me the second night, her voice exhausted. "It's the tone for the next 40 years with these people. Every holiday, every birthday, this is the thing that happened right before I married their son." I asked her what she thought staying quiet would cost her instead. She was quiet for a long moment. "I think it costs me something I can't really name yet," she finally said. "Something about what kind of person I decide to be on the way into this marriage instead of after I'm already in it." I didn't tell her what to do. I told her only that whatever she decided I'd support her, and that Ren would be fine either way. Because Ren had me, and that was never actually in question. She chose honesty. She called Vivian herself, sitting on her own bathroom floor with the door locked so nobody could interrupt her mid-sentence. Calm and direct, explaining plainly that she wasn't willing to start her marriage with a paid-off deception involving a child. Colette told me afterward that Vivian had gone silent for a long stretch on the other end of the line, long enough that Colette had to ask if she was still there. "I did what I thought was best for the day," Vivian finally said, according to Colette, not quite an apology, more of a defense dressed up as an explanation. Colette told her, gently, but without backing down, that best for the day couldn't include a 7-year-old finding out her role had been sold without her knowledge. The conversation didn't fully resolve their relationship. Vivian stayed cool toward Colette for months afterward, brief, clipped exchanges at family functions where warmth used to be, but it set an early, important boundary that Colette told me later she was proud of holding, whatever it eventually cost her with her new in-laws. Rather than reversing the flower girl assignment entirely, which would have meant humiliating another child who'd done nothing wrong in any of this, Colette created a second, meaningful role for Wren in the ceremony instead, asking her to read a short passage before the vows began. Wren practiced that passage even more intensely than she'd practiced her petal toss, standing in front of our bathroom mirror every night for 2 weeks, sounding out the harder words slowly, asking me 3 separate times whether she was saying cherish correctly. On the actual day, she wore a new dress Colette had picked out specifically for the reading, not the lavender one, something that was entirely visibly hers, and when the officiant called her name she walked up to the small podium with a composure that startled me, unfolded her index card, and read it clearly, proudly, her small voice carrying through a ceremony space gone completely quiet to listen to her. I watched through my camera viewfinder, my hands steady out of pure professional habit even though my eyes had gone blurry, and I caught the exact moment she finished, looked up, and grinned out at the crowd like she'd just landed a triple axel. Vivian's niece walked the aisle as originally planned, petals scattering exactly the way they were supposed to, and nobody in that room, watching both girls have their own distinct, real moment, would ever have guessed of the ugly financial architecture sitting quietly underneath the whole arrangement. I didn't stand up during the reception and make any kind of speech about what I'd found. I decided against that entirely, understanding that a public reveal would have served my own anger far more than it would have served my sister's wedding day or my daughter's dignity. Instead, quietly, after the wedding had ended, guests trickling out into the parking lot, string lights still glowing over an emptying dance floor, I found my mother by the coat check and handed her a plain manila envelope. Inside was a simple printed accounting of exactly what I'd found, the funneled invoice line, the transfer records, no dramatic speech attached to it, just a document. "I'm not going to make this into a scene," I told her. "I just want you to know I saw it clearly, all of it, and that this isn't something I'm going to pretend I didn't find." She opened the envelope right there, scanning the first page, her face going pale under the string lights. She didn't say anything. I didn't wait for her to. My relationship with my mother remains distant now, carefully bounded in a way it never used to be. Holiday visits shorter, phone calls less frequent, a specific, deliberate distance that I've made peace with, even though I know she hasn't fully. My relationship with Colette, by contrast, has deepened into something built on a shared, honestly examined truth, to do with making sure one small girl's real experience of that day finally, truthfully belonged to her. I think about that phone call sometimes, my mother's voice catching on a number she never meant to say out loud, my daughter twirling in the next room in a dress she still, to this day, occasionally wears just around the house because she loves how it moves. I don't think about it with the same sharp hurt anymore. I think about it as the moment I learned that quiet documentation can carry more weight than a raised voice ever could, and that protecting a child's dignity sometimes looks less like a seam and more like a single calm piece of paper handed over after everyone else has already gone home. If there's a small quiet cost in your own family that's been paid by someone too young to understand the transaction, I hope this reminds you that documenting the truth carefully is its own kind of protection. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments. And if you believe patience and quiet clarity can protect the people we love most, stay close, because Sweet Payback Stories has another one waiting for you very soon.